Broadcasting from Detroit's Cass Corridor, it's the Metro on WDET. I'm Kerry Jr. II.
And I'm Robyn Vincent. Today on the show, college campuses in America have become battlefields.
Students say they're being silenced, and when they speak out on Palestine, and some universities are cracking down instead of opening up debate.
We'll hear from a longtime college leader who spent decades inside higher education.
She argues that universities are still the very places where these conflicts should be worked through, not shut down.
But this struggle isn't only playing out in classrooms. From Metro Detroit neighborhoods to the waters off Gaza, one activist has spent decades pushing the fight for Palestinian freedom onto the world stage.
Together, these stories ask what arenas are left where people can raise their voices, confront injustice, and work through deep divisions, and who gets to decide whose voices are heard.
We begin with that global fight for Palestinian rights and the story of a Detroit-born attorney and activist who's helped carry it forward. It's been almost 2 years since Hamas attacked Israeli civilians on October 7th. Since then, Israel's military campaign in Gaza has killed more than 62,000 Palestinians, according to Gaza's health ministry. Israeli forces have destroyed schools, hospitals, mosques, and entire neighborhoods, turning daily life into rubble. The United Nations warns that nearly 640,000 people are now on the brink of famine. In the West Bank, armed Israeli settlers have stepped up violent attacks against Palestinians, while the Israeli government has carried out demolitions at some of the fastest rates in decades. At the same time, about 48 Israeli hostages remain trapped inside Gaza. Israel's leaders have approved a plan to seize Gaza City, and a leaked U.S.-linked proposal imagines putting Gaza under American trusteeship and paying Palestinians to leave. It's an idea many experts call forced transfer. Meanwhile, the United States continues to supply Israel with weapons as pro-Palestinian students face expulsions and immigrants are detained here at home. So who is working to change this? And how? This weekend, Huwaida Arraf spoke at the People's Conference for Palestine in Detroit, calling for a bold new strategy to, quote, globalize the Intifada as a worldwide movement for justice. The Arabic word Intifada literally means shaking off. In Palestinian history, it refers to popular uprisings against Israeli occupation. Arraf is a Detroit-born civil rights attorney and Palestinian-American activist. She co-founded the International Solidarity Movement, helped lead the Gaza Freedom Flotillas. Those are boats organized by activists to sail toward Gaza in an effort to break Israel's naval blockade and deliver humanitarian aid. Her law work focuses on free speech and human rights cases. Huwaida, thanks for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me.
So, Huwaida, I want to go back if we could. You grew up in Detroit in a Palestinian family and then studied Arabic, Judaic studies, political science, and international human rights law. I'm wondering, how did growing up here and then studying those subjects shape the way you see this conflict?
Thank you. I lost you for a minute, but I think I understood your question. You know, my parents came to the United States when my mother was pregnant with me. They wanted me and later my siblings to have freedom and to not grow up in a place where we aren't valued because of our religion. We are a Christian family, Israel, which was established over the ruins of Palestinian villages. Some Palestinians managed to stay, but most either live under occupation and colonization practices and apartheid, or They are citizens of Israel, but they're not equal citizens. They do not get the same rights because they are not Jewish. And my family comes from part that's living under occupation and part that is a citizen, but don't have equal rights. And my parents didn't want us to grow up with that, wanted us to know freedom and have opportunity. So they came to the US. And early on, I recognized that I did have that privilege because of the sacrifices that my parents made, and that I have a responsibility also because millions of Palestinians didn't have the same opportunities, are still oppressed, are still denied basic freedoms, and currently today in genocide are trying to survive. In Gaza are trying to survive a genocide. But so for me, I was looking to the ways to contribute, especially after I learned growing up that it was the United States that was enabling Israel's practices, and how much money the United States gives to Israel every single year, especially when I got involved in more kind of civil rights work and social justice movements and activism. I hear what our communities need at home. But instead of tending to that, our government is sending billions and billions of dollars to a foreign state that is denying my people freedom. And so after I graduated from college, where I went to the University of Michigan, and I focused on political science and Near Eastern studies and Hebrew and Judaic studies. I wanted to get into more diplomacy. I moved to the occupied Palestinian territory and saw with my own eyes Israel's practices, which was just horrific. Daily demolition of homes, denial of basic rights like the ability to go from one village to the next town without being harassed and abused, possibly detained, humiliated by Israeli forces. It's apartheid, Jim Crow, genocide, all wrapped into one. It's really hard to put into words, but for me, then, what can we do about it? And I wanted to support Palestinian popular organizing and resistance to these policies. And I knew from growing up in the United States that Palestinians were vilified. Our popular narrative here is that Israel is a victim and Palestinians are violent, Palestinians are terrorists, and that is just not only not reality, but it only takes a person 5 minutes with Palestinians and Palestinian communities to see what a lie so many people were fed. And so I began organizing, calling on people from around the world to come join me and us in an organization I ended up co-founding called the International Solidarity Movement.
Huwaida,
yes.
Forgive me for jumping in. We are going to get to that. I do want to focus on the International Solidarity Movement. But before we get there, I want to go back to your time in the Middle East, if we could, for a moment. Mm-hmm. I'm thinking about when you studied at Hebrew University in Jerusalem. Mm-hmm. You were living in the middle of the very conflict you'd been studying. What did that experience teach you about what's possible through dialogue and what the limits of dialogue are?
Well, first of all, it taught me that a lot of people were so misinformed. And so dialogue is important, absolutely. And I'm always willing and happy to talk to anyone. But what we can't allow to happen is for dialogue programs to overshadow the work that needs to be done to end the political structures and the political realities that tear people apart. And I see that so often where we try to institute a call on popular action. For example, the Palestinian community has called for global boycott, divestment, and sanctions. So learning from South African movement against apartheid and divesting from apartheid, Palestinian civil society called on the world to isolate and to divest from or boycott companies and institutions that are supporting Israel's occupation, colonization, and apartheid. That is often vilified, and we say instead that Palestinians need to just dialogue, need to negotiate. But Palestinians have been negotiating for decades, and Israel has continued to steal more land and to make the situation worse. So while we always must be willing to talk, these kinds of programs can't be used to delegitimize or to be instead of the work that needs to be done, again, to put pressure on Israel, to force Israel to change its policies.
Let's stay on the topic of divestment for a moment, if we could. For people who've never followed that movement, what does divestment mean, and why do you see it as an effective form of nonviolent resistance?
Of course. So divestment means to pull holdings and investments in companies that are profiting from policies that we disagree with. And in this case, profiting from Israel's occupation and colonization policies and now genocide. In the United States, we have been focusing, or even when I was at the University of Michigan, and it has continued, the student movement has really been pushing universities to review its investments and to stand in line with our higher education systems and really our principles as Americans. What we say is we support freedom, human rights, and dignity, and therefore we should not be invested in companies that profit from the opposite of that, from denying people their freedom, from mass murder, from colonization policies. And unfortunately, what we've been seeing is a real crackdown at the university level on these students who are demanding that their universities aren't invested in colonization, apartheid, and genocide. But divestment is pulling investments from corporations, companies that profit from human rights abuses and mass killing and genocide. It is a legitimate demand, and we saw it really put pressure on the South African apartheid government during the anti-apartheid movement in South Africa. And for Palestinians, it was really learning from and speaking with our South African colleagues, where we had the idea to call for a global boycott and divestment and sanctions movement for Palestine, because just like it worked in South Africa, we're hoping it can work in Palestine.
Critics of the divestment movement say it stifles free speech, especially on college campuses. What do you make of that?
Oh, I think it's just the opposite. In fact, when student councils or student governments are debating, it's an open debate and discussion and passing of resolutions that reflect student principles and hopefully the university community's principles, but it actually invites debate, discussion, research, and understanding about what we're actually calling for. And one of the beautiful and I think positive things that have come out of the various student groups and campuses on which divestment resolutions have been studied and discussed, debated, and passed is the discussion that is had around it. Now, those who claim that it stifles debate actually don't want any kind of criticism of Israel. That's really what we're at. We have students and others that try to talk about Palestinian human rights and what we need to do to ensure that we are not complicit in violations of Palestinian human rights. We immediately get accused of being anti-Semitic, which completely disregards the very large number of Jewish American and Jews worldwide, really, who are opposed to Israel's policies and who are part of the Palestinian human rights movement here in the United States and around the world. So there is no legitimate criticism that can be thrown at the movement that is calling for discussing and actually taking action to divest or boycott from Israel. It's really those who support unconditionally Israel's actions that are trying to silence us who are calling for more action, more debate, and more movement on this issue.
Huwaida, what I'm hearing from you is that you feel that there has been a severe conflation of pro-Palestinian rights and the idea of anti-Semitism, that when people are speaking out for the movement to free Palestine, for Palestinian sovereignty, that it is conflated with anti-Semitism. And I want to go a little bit deeper into that notion, because last year you gave a talk at Bloomfield Hills High School that sparked backlash and accusations of anti-Semitism, which you rejected. How do you separate criticism of Israeli government policy from anti-Semitism, and why do these conversations so often ignite conflict here in the U.S.?
Absolutely. As you said, I was invited to speak at Bloomfield Hills High School. I spoke for 7 minutes, really, to a group of students about my experiences growing up in the United States and my experiences in the occupied Palestinian territory. And one of the things that I stressed is that this is not a religious conflict at all. In fact, I'm married into a Jewish family. We raise our kids to respect Jewish values and tradition and the religion. A lot of my closest friends are Jews. And as I mentioned, so many people in the movement are Jewish. But there are those who unconditionally support Israel and try to conflate the two, that if we criticize Israel, if we focus on Israel's rights abuses, then we are being anti-Semitic. And it's such a dangerous conflation, because anti-Semitism is real and it needs to be fought. And it needs to be fought just like any kind of racism and discrimination need to be fought. But when you, again, conflate the two, you are confusing people, and you are directing attention away from true anti-Semitism in order to silence people who are essentially campaigning for and speaking up for Palestinian rights. But it is those who want, who support Israel unconditionally, don't want to hear these criticisms and want to silence critics of Israel's policies, that throw these accusations at us, and we wholeheartedly reject them. So speaking up for Palestinian rights, it's absolutely not anti-Semitic. People, I think, know anti-Semitism is hatred of Jews. That has nothing to do with Israel's policies. And in fact, trying to suggest that criticism of Israeli government policies is offensive or against Jews is saying that Jews have to support Israel, which is anti-Semitic in and of itself. To suggest that all Jews have to think one way or have to support this a state that is on trial for genocide, that is anti-Semitism. Not this global movement and effort that includes Jews and Muslims and Christians and non-denominational people and everybody that is standing up for the basic human rights of an entire people.
So, Huwaida, the conflation is not only conflating the pro-Palestine movement with anti-Semitism, but it's also conflating being critical of the Israeli government with anti-Semitism. How do you draw a line and help people to stop conflating these two things? How do you do that?
Well, I mean, I am, and all of the organizations and the movement that I'm a part of has been unequivocal in its statement that we are opposed to all forms of discrimination, and that includes anti-Semitism. It requires people understanding that criticizing a state is not anti-Semitic, and that Jews have to be separated from the policies of a state. So it requires a kind of a basic understanding that this state that claims to be acting for the Jewish people is actually not doing so. And if people listen to many Jews, and there are so many incredible, powerful, not only Jewish activists, but organizations that are trying to say, no, the state of Israel does not speak for us. There's a organization called Not in Our Name. There is a Jewish Voice for Peace, one of the biggest ones. And they have not only books, but on their website, resources that explain that the state of Israel does not speak in our name. And actually what the state of Israel does is it's antithetical to everything that our religion teaches us. So people must separate. And again, I will stress that it is a policy, the state of Israel, which is a settler colonial state, and it is built on oppressing and erasing the Palestinian people. That is its policy. And in order to advance its policies, it has been claiming to take its actions in the name of the Jewish people. But that's not what Judaism stands for. And in order to keep its policies and to keep its global support, especially support from the United States, it has worked to and invested a lot of time and energy in silencing people and silencing critics of its policies. So it really requires an awareness. And I know that people sometimes get confused and they don't want to be accused of anti-Semitism, and that might cause people to self-censor. But it's important to recognize that this is a tactic that has been used by those who are pro-apartheid and pro-genocide to silence people, and that people, this policy of silencing and of conflating anti-Semitism with criticism of Israel's policies has been exposed, and you are not alone if you speak up. In fact, this accusation now by supporters of Israel doesn't carry much weight. Those of us who are really opposed to anti-Semitism are also opposed to suppression and oppression of Palestinians and are fighting for Palestinian rights. So those of us are standing together against those who support the policies of Israel, killing Palestinians.
Huwaida, I'm going to jump in
promoting
here.
Global anti-Semitism.
Huwaida, forgive me. I'm going to jump in here because we need to take a break. This is The Metro on WDET. I'm Robyn Vincent. My guest is Huwaida Arraf. We're talking about her pro-Palestinian activism on the ground and at sea. We're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll look at the strategies activists are using today to try to change U.S. policy. Robyn Vincent. My guest is Huwaida Arraf, civil rights attorney and Palestinian-American activist, and we're talking about her life's work and what it reveals about the fight for Palestinian rights. Huwaida, I want to look to the open seas now, because you went on to help lead the Gaza Freedom Flotillas, and those are boats that have tried to break Israel's naval blockade of Gaza, which the United Nations and many legal scholars say is unlawful. And the most famous was in 2010. That was when Israeli commandos boarded the ships and killed 9 activists. What were those missions really about? Delivering aid or forcing the world to confront the legality or illegality of the blockade?
Yes. First, I want to say that the 2010 flotilla actually ended up killing 10 of our colleagues. 9 were killed on the spot, including one American citizen who's a 19-year-old pre-med student. But one activist lay in coma for 4 years and then he died. So it was a total of 10. And we had dozens injured, almost 700. All of us were abducted by Israeli forces and taken against our will and put in Israeli prisons. These actions are, yes, we are carrying humanitarian aid because Gaza needs it, but it needs it because of a political reality, a policy that, as you mentioned, has been deemed illegal by so many legal bodies and authorities on this issue. And this is not new. Today, we are seeing that Israel's siege has led to an engineered famine. So every day, people and babies are being starved to death by a policy that has only been amplified and exacerbated because the world has not done anything about it since Israel imposed it in 2006. Israel initially imposed it because it did not like the outcome of Palestinian elections. So it used it as a form of collective punishment to punish the entire civilian population for exercising their right to vote. And then it just continued to make the siege even tighter, severely restricting what can get in and out of this small area of land. You know, the whole size of Gaza is the size of Metro Detroit. And over 2 million people live in this small territory that is completely controlled all the way around by Israel, by an occupying power that essentially is trying to get rid of the Palestinian people. And so back in 2006, the United Nations, we had reports coming out that Israel's policy is leading to the rising rates of malnutrition in children, anemia in pregnant women, the destruction of the Palestinian economy, and nobody was doing anything about it. So a small group of activists in 2008, which I was a part of, we sailed 2 small fishing boats to try to get to Gaza. And yes, we were going to confront one of the most powerful militaries in the world in the open seas in the Mediterranean. But we were determined to either try to get to Gaza or to expose to the world that Israel's policy, it tells the world that it is only defending itself and it is about security. We wanted to show the world that it's not about security. It's about collective punishment, and it's a deadly policy, and the world should not be supporting this. So 44 activists from 17 different countries, myself and some fellow Americans included, got on these 2 small fishing boats and said, we are going to confront this blockade, and if Israel is going to stop us, it's going to have to use force against peace activists carrying nothing. We constitute no threat to Israel. We ended up, surprisingly, against all of our expectations and plans, in the summer of 2008, actually making it to Gaza. And we were able to make it to Gaza a few times. But then Israel tried to break our efforts and break our movement and started using violence against our boats. It nearly capsized 2 of our boats, commandeered others, and that's when we organized the 2010 Freedom Flotilla. So instead of a small fishing boat, we had 7 large vessels carrying, and we were carrying at that time 10,000 tons of humanitarian aid. We were 700 people from 36 countries. And again, we constituted, no threat to Israel. We wanted to get to Gaza. We wanted to get aid into Gaza. And we wanted to tell the world that Israel's policies are illegal. It shouldn't be us civilians at sea doing this. It should be our governments that are forcing Israel to change its policies. But as long as our governments won't do it, we will. And on May 31st, 2010, Israel launched a lethal naval assault and killed 10 of our activists. But we did not stop. We continued to try to sail and to reach Gaza.
Huwaida, I want to stay on this very traumatic moment, if we could. I'm wondering what you personally saw and experienced when Israeli forces intercepted your ship. I mean, can you paint us a little bit more of a picture of this moment?
Yes. So a few hours before the attack, I was not on the flagship, which was carrying most of the civilians. We had other civilian boats, and I was on an American flagged ship. Actually, it was a much smaller boat called the Challenger, flying the U.S. flag and carrying mainly U.S. citizens. And we were sailing very close to the flagship, which was called the Mavi Marmara. I was the spokesperson for the group. And so the Israeli Navy contacted us and told us, demanded that we turn around. It said that we are heading towards a blockaded area. And I said that your blockade is unlawful. You are punishing an entire civilian population. This is collective punishment, and this is illegal. We are civilians. We carry no weapons. We constitute no threat to you. We are carrying only humanitarian aid for the people of Gaza. So do not attack us. Do not use force against us. And I kept repeating this over and over again. And at a certain point, the Israeli Navy stopped communicating with us. And hours later, I heard gunshots. It was the middle of the night, about 4 a.m. I went up to the deck of the vessel that I was on, and I saw a helicopter above the Mavi Marmara, and I heard gunshots, and I recall thinking that it must be a terrifying situation for everyone on board. Unfortunately, myself, spending so much time in the occupied West Bank, where we are frequently shot at by Israeli forces, I wasn't as scared. I was used to this, I'm sad to say. But I know that all of these people coming from all of these 36 different countries must have been terrified. Our boat, Israel had cut off our communications. So we actually tried to get away a little bit just to give ourselves enough time to communicate to the outside world that we're under attack. But we were quickly surrounded by commandos who essentially beat us up in order to take over our boat. Myself and my colleagues on the Challenger, we tried to link arms and keep the commandos off. And they threw stun grenades. They fired paint pellets, but at people's faces. So we had one young woman who had her nose broken. Myself, they smashed my head into the deck of the boat, which they had broken glass on it before. And then they tied my hands behind my back and put a sack over my head and dragged me to another area of the boat. And this is heavily armed, masked commandos belonging to one of the most powerful, brutal militaries in the world, taking over small ships of civilian activists carrying only humanitarian aid. All of our cameras, those were the weapons we had. We had cameras and we had phones, were confiscated, and then they took our ships all into an Israeli port. Everyone, when we got to the Israeli port, is the first time that I learned that my colleagues aboard the other ship, the Mavi Marmara, had been killed. I was devastated.
I'm so sorry, Huwaida. And thank you for outlining that, what I'm sure was a terrifying experience and one that I'm sure stays very deep with you. I mean, it has me wondering if the goal is to stop the siege of Gaza and the mass suffering of civilians. You're describing one very courageous way that people are trying to do that. But what else should activists be doing? Who should they be targeting most? Members of Congress, the White House, the weapons industry, unions, ordinary voters? What do you feel is the most effective step forward?
Everybody, absolutely everybody, because the world really has not made Israel suffer any consequences. There have been no repercussions against Israel for these policies. And it's been killing and oppressing Palestinians for decades. And in 2010, as I said, they killed 10 of our colleagues, not Palestinians. So Palestinians and internationals, whatever Israel does, it seems to be immune from any kind of accountability. And this is largely owing to the United States' uncritical support of Israel and the fact that the U.S. keeps the weapons flowing, gives Israel nearly $4 billion of U.S. aid every single year. That is in addition to, and that was even before this latest onslaught and genocide, during which time the United States has surged weapons and aid to Israel. So in the last 2 years, it is estimated that we've given Israel already like $30 billion. And this is a country that is on trial now for genocide. Just a few days ago, the world's largest association of genocide scholars voted 85%, almost unanimous, to pass a resolution calling Israel's actions a genocide. These are authoritative scholars on genocide, many of them Jewish, as we can expect, because of the history of the Holocaust, etc., calling this a genocide. And the United States is still giving billions and billions of dollars of our tax money to Israel to continue this. Because over the years, there's been no accountability. We see how this has escalated. So as you mentioned in the introduction, we've had over 63,000 Palestinians killed, and that is the bare minimum. That is only those that we know. It is estimated that we are looking probably today at hundreds of thousands killed, and babies and children being dismembered, disemboweled, beheaded, and starved to death every single day. And it is only possible because the United States not only sends the weapons, but provides political cover. So it prevents any kind of action at the United Nations Security Council. It prevents the passage of any measure that criticizes Israel or that tries to pass any kind of United Nations action to hold Israel accountable. So what we need to do as American citizens is recognize that we are complicit here. We don't want our tax dollars being used to commit a genocide. We want our country to be on the right side of history and actually support freedom and human rights, as we say we do. And so to do that, we need citizens to be aware and to call, to flood the offices of our representatives, of our members of Congress and of our senators, and demand that they vote to stop weapons transfers to Israel.
So weapons transfers is number one on your list. We're running out of time here, Huwaida, and so I want to close things out by asking you this: what's the biggest misconception about you, or more broadly about the movement to free Palestine, that you want listeners to leave with today?
The biggest misconception is that it is anyway opposed, anti-anyone, that is anti-Jewish or anti-anyone. We're actually fighting for a world and a reality where all people can live in freedom and dignity. And so one of our chants, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, that has been called anti-Semitic and genocidal. And that chant really says, in the historic land of Palestine, because it was Palestine before Israel was founded and before Israel displaced and murdered so many Palestinians to found its state, it was Palestine. This is our historic homeland. But call it whatever you want. Between the river and the sea, the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea, we are campaigning for a world in which everybody, every religion, Palestinians and Israelis, Jews, Christians, and Muslims, can live in freedom. That is not the reality today. And so if anybody that believes in freedom, human rights, and dignity for all people should be standing with us. And American citizens especially, because we are so complicit in what's happening today, because it is our hard-earned tax dollars that is being spent to commit genocide, and instead of being spent here to give people health care and to improve our schools in our own communities. We need to raise our voices. We need to tell our members of Congress to stop supporting this, tell our president to stop supporting this. All unions can play a powerful role also, because unions have such a voice in also demanding that we will not transfer weapons. We will not be complicit in this genocide that the United States is participating in. So everybody can take action, please.
Huwaida Arraf is a Detroit-born attorney, activist, and co-founder of the International Solidarity Movement. She helped lead the Gaza Freedom Flotillas and continues her fight in courtrooms and communities for Palestinian rights and free speech here at home. Huwaida, thanks for joining me on the Metro.
Thank you for having me, Robyn.
We've been talking with Detroit-born attorney and activist Huwaida Arraf about the global fight for Palestinian rights and how that struggle extends into our own communities here in Michigan. Coming up, we take that conversation onto college campuses, where universities are silencing pro-Palestinian voices. We'll hear from the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression on the line between safety, politics, and the First Amendment. We'll be right back on the Metro. Stay with us.